Good morning, folks. I'm Jim Van Hecky with the Education Outreach Division of the North Carolina ABC Commission, and we're pleased to bring you this virtual conference. Thank you for being with us for this fourth session of this exciting virtual conference. I want to thank Governor Roy Cooper for his, thank you. I want to thank Governor Roy Cooper for his participation in this conference and his endorsement of what we're trying to do here. And I want to thank Preston Bumgarner and the entire Talk It Out team and 919 Marketing for making all this happen for us today and during the month of March. Our objectives for this virtual conference is to bring great teachers to our participants. And we've done that. We've had some wonderful ones in the first three sessions. You're going to hear a wonderful speaker today and close up with another wonderful one next week. Also, to encourage us to be learners rather than learned. A quote from Eric Hoffer: "In times of change, learners inherit the earth, while the learned find themselves beautifully equipped to deal with a world that no longer exists." Science has taught us an awful lot. We know a lot more today than we knew about the adolescent brain 10, 20 years ago. We continue to learn, our knowledge continues to expand, and so we want to continue to be learners, and our speakers are helping us with that. We also want to work together. Prevention, treatment, recovery supports, no silos. No more silos. We're all working together. We at the ABC Commission that Talk It Out have a narrow focus. Other organizations have a narrow focus. Working together, we can create collective impact across the state of North Carolina. Here's our schedule for the day. In a few moments, I'm going to introduce Right Reverend Porter Taylor. I'm going to ask you to mute your audio, and if you have questions as Dr. Porter Taylor is speaking, write them into the chat. Porter Taylor is the retired Episcopal bishop for the Episcopal Diocese of Western North Carolina. He went to school at Chapel Hill. He's got a master's degree. He's got a doctorate in theology. And he's been a friend of mine for a long time. So I want to tell you a personal story before I turn it over to him. I don't know when it was, maybe 15 years ago or so. Maybe I got a call from a friend in Hendersonville who invited me to participate in a conference that the Western Diocese was holding on addiction and recovery. And she said, "I want you to meet the bishop." She was all excited. "I want you to meet the bishop." Well, I grew up Presbyterian. We didn't have bishops in the Presbyterian church. I had a vision of bishops as old men with robes and mitre hats and maybe carrying a staff. Kind of a biblical vision of what a bishop was. So when I got over to Canoga Conference Center and met my contact, and she said, "Well, come over here. I want you to meet the bishop." So I walked over, and here was this young guy in a tweed sport coat with, my vision is no tie or anything, looking very collegial. And he said, "Did you go to Chapel Hill?" And I said, "Yeah." He said, "Did you hang out at such and such a place?" And I said, "Yeah." And he stuck out his hand and he introduced himself with the nickname that I had known 50 years before. And then I'm going to let him tell you the rest of the story of what happened that day, but it was an astounding experience for me and for the people who were attending that conference. It's just my pleasure to introduce my friend Porter Taylor. Porter, thank you for being with us today.
I want to thank Preston Bumgardner for helping me prepare for today. And a special thanks to Jim Van Hickey for inviting me to speak. Jim and I go back to 1969. Now, let me know, are you getting any feedback from my voice?
No, we're good, Porter.
Okay, great. So I'd like to say that Jim and I both look the same, but part of being in recovery is to be honest. So I really can't say that. But I do want to thank you for inviting me. And I do want to thank you for all the work you do. It's just a pleasure to be with you today. And I give thanks for your interest in helping people of all ages, but especially teenagers, to avoid making the mistakes I make. So if you have any comments, I invite you to use chat all along the way. I want to start with a line from Psalm 84. One day in God's courts is better than 1,000 in my own room. Some of you know the truth of that. We don't need to isolate. We don't need to pick our scabs. We don't need to let our dark angel take over our lives. We don't need to sit in our own room drinking poison, because God is always inviting us into God's courts. The courts are where we're free to be completely ourselves. For me, the mystery of my addiction is that God, the world's highest power, yearns for us to leave our own room and walk in the courts of the Lord. I mean, I never doubted God's power. I just doubted that God would want a person like me to leave my room and then to walk into God's courts, because I felt unworthy of that. So I'm speaking to you today not as an expert in the 12 steps, not as a kind of guru about recovery. I speak to you today as an alcoholic who was locked in his own room for 25 years, simply because of the disease of alcoholism. This means we can't seem to get enough of what we don't need, because the disease of alcoholism means we forget who we are and we forget who God is. We cut ourselves off from our true self. The true self is the self that God created us as God's image. And instead, we think we are our addiction. We think that addiction defines us and therefore makes us somehow unworthy. We lose sight of the past because it's too painful. We lose sight of the future because we can't believe it can be any different. And so we sort of get stuck. We don't have a horizon that's bigger than the present moment. We don't have a past that doesn't remind us of what we lost. Now, I'm not trying to convert you. I'm not even trying to convert you to the Episcopal Church, but I am going to talk about God. Because without God, without my higher power, I don't think I'd be alive today. And without God, nothing else could restore me to sanity. So let me tell you how I think about the mystery of alcoholism before I get into the details of my own story. In the book of Acts, in the Bible, we read this: when you seek God with all your heart, God will let you find him. So here's the mystery of alcoholism and the mystery of addiction at its worst. Even though we read this promise, even though we believe it would happen for some people, we don't believe it can happen for us in our dream. Yes, there is a psychological disposition to become an alcoholic, and it runs in families. My aunt was an alcoholic. My uncle was an alcoholic. My grandfather was an alcoholic. So there's a Taylor gene, there's a biological disposition to alcoholism. But I have a twin sister who does not struggle with this disease. So there has to be a spiritual element as well as a genetic. And the spiritual element is how we see ourselves and how we see God. I mean, do we believe that God, our higher power, desires us to be free from the chains of this disease? But the deeper question, at least for me, wasn't about God. I believed in miracles. I had no problem with the Bible, but I could not believe that God would want to save someone like me. So when I read, when you seek me with all your heart, I will let you find me, I thought, I'm not part of that you. That you is everyone else. And then I thought, well, what difference would it make if I indeed found God? Because the problem wasn't God, the problem was me. We can call that low self-esteem, but another word for that, which I think is a more accurate word, is despair. I didn't doubt about God's power. I just doubted that God would see me as worthy. I used to teach literature in a college in Nashville, and one of the texts I loved to teach was Dante's Inferno. But I admit I didn't know if I really learned the lesson because I'm not sure I applied it exactly to me. So the Inferno is a story of Dante walking into hell. And his picture of hell is that it has many, many layers. It spirals downward to the center of the earth. And each layer is a sin, like anger or adultery or stealing and so on. So if you're in hell because of anger, the punishment you receive is to be angry forever. The punishment you receive about being murderous is to be murderous forever or jealous forever. Because the way we miss out on life is to believe that where we are is where we're going to be forever. And that is to lose faith in God. Because our faith is never in what we can do. Our faith is what our higher power has promised to do. What is the ninth promise in the steps? It's we will realize that God is doing for us what we could not do for ourselves. Let's remember the psalm. When you seek me with all your heart, I will let you find me. So what is it we have to do? Well, we have to begin with ourselves. We have to humbly ask God to to remove our shortcomings. Now, when I talk like this, it seems pretty simple. It's like we ask, God delivers, and as the promises say, our whole attitude and outlook on life will change. But here's the thing. We are the veil that hides us from the paradise we see. We are the veil. I can talk about my family's disposition. I can talk about my genetic makeup till the cows come home. But at the end of the day, it's me that has to turn. It's me that has to ask for help. And honestly, I think there are only 3 words that matter. The first one is please. And the second one is thank you. We have to say those from our heart. And we have to believe that after we say please, something will happen. Something will happen for people like us who want to say thank you. We have to believe God's promise with all your heart. Seek me and I will find you. All of this to say is that one of the reasons I drank is because I was just so lonely. And yes, there are moments when I felt connected. It's why, as a teenager, the only way I knew to dance was with a lot of alcohol. Because after I drank, I didn't feel so self-conscious. I felt kind of free. But the problem is, of course, it wears off. And then you need more alcohol to get to that magic place. And as you drink more and more and more, you need more and more and more. And it becomes this vicious circle. But let me give you the good news before I get into more details of my story. There can be happy ending to addiction. It's why we say grateful recovering alcoholics. It's not just that we're grateful not to drink, we're grateful because our alcoholism has been a way that we discover God and discover God's love and discover God's power. Amazing grace that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost and now I'm found, was blind, but now I see. So, why was I lost and blind? Gerald May has a book called Addiction and Grace. It's a wonderful book. I really recommend it to you. And this is what he says. Addiction is any compulsive behavior that limits the freedom of human desire. Instead of desiring a whole life, we desire to be numb. We desire to escape, and therefore we are not free. So, here's my story. I started drinking when I was 14. I started drinking when I was so alone. So, what I would invite you, if you feel comfortable, is go and chat and tell us when you started drinking. Because we know that this is a common disease that has affected thousands and thousands of people. And that sense of being in communion with one another also helps us relieve ourselves from this disease by communally turning to God. So, I began this talk with a verse from the Psalms. One day in God's courts is better than 1,000 in my own room. Well, as a teenager, drinking was the only way I could get out of my own room. Because honestly, at 14 or 15 or 16 or any age, how do you dance without alcohol? How do you talk to girls? Or if you're a girl, how do you talk to boys? How do you quiet all those fears about who you are and how you look and what's going on in your body? The thing is, we just can't get enough of what we don't need. I long to be in the courts of the Lord. I long to be connected. But the truth is, I never thought they would let someone like me in, not if they really knew me. The second step is came to believe a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. But it took me 40 years to get past that step. And this is not because I disbelieved in God. I disbelieved in myself. I was one of those people that looked as if I thrived in high school. But that was on the outside. On the inside, I never felt worthy. I never felt as if I belonged. Even though I had a ton of friends, I thought they liked me because they really didn't know me. And if they did know me, they would stop liking me. So I kind of lived a double life. And the truth is, I lived a double life for about 26 years. So I looked good on the outside, but I was filled with shame on the inside. So in high school, I was a starting split end on the football team, and I was on the basketball team, and I ran the 440 on the track team. I was the school vice president. I was a member of a social club. I had a steady girlfriend. I honestly was given most popular in high school. But when I was in the ninth grade, I became gripped by a kind of fear. And the fear was it wasn't enough. The fear was I wasn't enough. And that fear stayed with me. The fear that I was family we are. So to give you a sense of that, my father's sister literally drank herself.
Hey, everyone. Porter's having some technical difficulties. We'll be right back soon. Stay with us. Thanks.
Can you hear me now?
We can hear you now, Porter.
You know, this is part of what I was talking about because every time you think you're in control, God has a way of sort of knocking on your head and saying, no, you're not in control. So it's a learning process. It's a constant learning process, right? So I can't control my computer and I'm turning to God. So back to me in high school. I had this fear that I just wasn't enough. I wasn't smart enough, wasn't popular enough, I wasn't attractive to the girls enough. And the way I dealt with that is I just kept busy. I kept busy so I could sort of push the fear out. It's why, honestly, sports were so helpful. Because the thing is, though, there were just too many hours in the day. And so you could only block out the fear of inadequacy so much. And then the other part of that is I lived in a family of what we called heavy drinkers. So if you have a family like that, put that in chat so we get a sense of how much this is a common denominator. So my aunt, this would be my father's sister, literally drank herself to death. For the last years of her life, she never left her house. The grocery store delivered her groceries, and because she lived in South Carolina, the liquor store weekly delivered her large bottles of bourbon. So my fear was a lot about going through adolescence. We all go through the hormones thing, but what matters is how we deal with that. And the only way I felt dealing with that, the only way I felt dealing with sort of being this, going through this weird period of change was drinking. And so I started stealing my parents' liquor in junior high. My friends and I would pretend we were James Bond. And we'd have our beer or bourbon or whatever we could have, and we would say, these are going to be shaken but not stirred. I actually found a convenience store in downtown Asheville that would sell beer to anyone. So after sports practice, I would walk over to the store and buy a lot of beer and then catch the bus home. One Friday night, a bunch of guys, I think we were in like the 10th grade, went on the golf course and were drinking. We had all snuck out of our house. It must have been like 2 in the morning. But the thing is, we made so much noise, the police came, and I had to call my dad from jail at 3 in the morning. I'd like to say I learned something from that lesson, but I didn't. I learned that I just should be more careful. And so the thing is, we know something's wrong, but it's our fear that keeps us from getting help. And that voice of fear says to us, you're not enough. And then you think, if I'm not enough, I'll do anything to numb that pain. When I went to college, the fear didn't leave, but then I was old enough to drink in the open. So I studied hard, but I partied hard as well. I think maybe my scariest, certainly the dumbest moment in my life was one night my date and I went out drinking. I was driving a motorcycle and we had so much to drink that I had the sense that somehow I could magically feel the turns in the road through the handlebars. So I turned the headlight off on the motorcycle, which pitch black, dark. Thank God my date hit me on the head and told me to turn the lights back on. As an adult, I learned how to drink discreetly. And honestly, I never missed a day of work. I never had a DUI. I never fell down in the middle of a party because I drank a lot, but I had my serious drinking late at night. So on the outside, I was a professor of American literature. At Belmont College in Nashville, I was Dr. Taylor. And so I masked this fear with titles, with diplomas, with my position. But at night when my wife and children were asleep, I had to drink down my fear of who I really was. Remember the song, one day in the courts of the Lord are worth 1,000 in my own room. Well, I was sick of being in my own room, but I didn't think anyone in the courts of the Lord would want to take me in. I wanted to believe in God's mercy, but I could not overcome my unbelief. And you know what that unbelief was? It wasn't in God. I knew God could do miracles. Knew God would do miracles because I had seen them. And the Bible is full of them. I just didn't think God would want to save a person like me. And the pain of that thought made me drink. I emphasize this for a reason. We cannot tell what's going on in another person from the outside. Because from the outside, my life looked great. I played sports, I had friends, I was going to college, had a girlfriend, I was polite. In high school, I went to church, but I seldom felt worthy. I did not feel as if I belonged. And so when I was trapped in what we in the church called works righteousness, it means you get what you deserve. So if you behave, you get rewarded. If you don't get rewarded. And therefore, you have to stay in the lines. And staying in the lines was exhausting. It was a world with no understanding of grace, the free gift from God. A lot of why I drank was because I needed to relax. And I needed to reward myself for being good all the time. Those of you who drink know that there's this sweet spot in drinking. There's this magical moment where all your fears, all your inhibitions, all your self-consciousness, all your scars evaporate. And you're alive in that moment. And you feel as if you belong. Let me know in chat if you've had that feeling. But here's the thing. It goes away because you drink too much. You do something stupid. You fall asleep and wake up feeling awful. But there is good news. There is a way to break this cycle. Because what is it we recover in recovery? We recover a God's glimpse of how much God loves us. We recover a realization that God is bigger than our addiction, and God's love is bigger than our shame. We recover the amazing news that if anyone turns to God, there is a new creation. We recover the simple news that resurrection is not about us, not about our worthiness. It's about God. It's about your higher power. And so therefore, the point is not to have a sinless life. The point is not to prove that we deserve to be restored to sanity. It's that God loves us regardless. God loves so much that God is willing to turn our lives right side up. What is steps 2 in the steps? We came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. And so recovery is about reorienting our vision. It's about how we stop thinking about us and remember who God is and remember what God's desire is for us. We discover or recover our faith in a higher power. The truth is, I never doubted God's ability to do miracles. I just doubted that God would want to do that for someone like me. And so the key word in step 2 is us. A power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. I didn't doubt God. I doubted my own worthiness. In one of the Psalms, Psalm 84, there's this one line. One day in your courts is better than 1,000 in my own room. But the disease of alcohol convinces us we don't belong in God's room. Of course, we know there are other people in God's room. We know all the saints before us and all the people around us that seem to have their lives together. And maybe we can look on the outside as if we belong in the courts of the Lord. But that's because other people don't know who we really are. It's why I did so much of my drinking at night. I did so much of my drinking because I knew that Jack Daniels would never let me down. I believed other people could get into the courts of the Lord, but I was pretty sure I would never get there. And it's this vicious cycle. The worse I felt about myself, the more I drank. And the more I drank, the worse I felt about myself. So here's what I want to make sure you hear. We have no idea what other people are going through. We are blessed to be in this country, and I am proud to be an American. And I have traveled a good bit overseas. There's nowhere else I would rather live. But as a consumer economy, on our worst day, we forget who we are because we think we are what we own, we are what people say about us, or we are what we do. Power, prestige, possessions. But all of those are about our public self, and none of those can make us feel at home with our true self. None of those can fill this hole we all have in our heart. It's why being a teenager is so hard, because we always feel as if we're judged by our exterior. And it's why I started drinking when I was 14. It didn't matter how many sports I played, or what girl paid attention to me, or remember, I lived back in the 60s, or if I wore Gant shirts and Weejuns. There's just this mantra in our head, and it just says, you're not good enough, you're not smart enough, you're not good looking enough. There's a hole in our heart, and we will fill that hole one way or another. And at 14, and really at 24, there's a belief that somehow alcohol seemed the easiest and the safest way to do that. Because the truth is, alcohol itself never judges you. And alcohol doesn't let you down, even though the longer you drink, the more you have to drink. But there's a price. There's always a cost. And it's about your relationships with other people. It's about your relationship with your God. And it's about your relationship with your true self. And so there's this cycle. The worse I felt about myself, the more I had to drink. And the more I had to drink, the worse I felt about myself. So here's how recovery started for me. I knew I wanted to be an Episcopal priest when I was 12, but I didn't think the church would want someone like me. So in my mid-30s, I realized if I didn't try to become a priest, I would always regret it. Now, the Episcopal Church has an incredibly complicated process for ordination. It took a couple of years of doing internship before you went to the bishop, and that person would decide if you could be a priest. So near the end of this process, I had to go see a psychologist. The psychologist asked me about my drinking, and when I told her the truth, she said, "You have to see an alcohol specialist." I almost said, You know, I am an alcohol specialist, but I did not. So she sent me to see a person named Kitty Myatt in downtown Nashville. And one of her questions was, when is the last time you had any alcohol to drink? And I said, uh, 20 minutes ago. Because even though it was 11 in the morning, I had stopped at the Jim Dandy convenience store on my way over there to have a beer so I could quiet my fears. It was a long pause. And then she looked at me and she said, "You have to quit drinking." Well, I had quit drinking before for a period. Um, a lot of times during our 40 days of Lent, I could quit drinking. And so I said, okay, I can do that. How long? And she said, forever. Hearing the word forever was like hearing a death knell, because how was I going to live without alcohol? What would me and my extended family do together? That was our sport. How in the world was I ever going to get to sleep? Would I ever be able to dance at parties? Would I ever be able to have fun? Would I ever be able to laugh? What else did you do when you were watching football games, and on and on and on? Her saying forever, however, gave me a glimpse of what my life could be. I knew I could stay as a professor teaching literature, but I also knew I would regret it for all my life if I didn't try to be ordained a priest. I knew that deep in my soul, that's what I wanted. I was not sure if that's what God wanted, because honestly, I wasn't sure that God would want someone who drank like me as a priest in God's church. So I went home and told my wife, Jo, I said, I'm going to stop drinking. And so we went through the house. And first we started with the refrigerator, and we took all the beer and poured it down the drain. We took all the wine and poured it down the drain. And then we went to the liquor cabinet and we took all the Jack Daniels and poured it down the drain. And then I said, you know, I've always had this spare just in case we ran out. So we went into the linen closet and I went behind the brooms and got all those bottles and we poured that out. I was okay for the first week. I ate a lot of ice cream, a lot of sugar. I read a lot of books late at night, because honestly, how do you get to sleep without drinking? I felt a little bit of a mixture of loss. I felt a mixture of lack of freedom, because honestly, without drinking, there were just so many hours in the day. And that loss was because there were so many hours in the day. I wonder if you've had that experience. Maybe you could put those in chat as well. So I called my mother and I said to her, you know, Mom, I've decided to quit drinking. And she said, I'm worried that you won't have fun anymore. I was kind of afraid of that too, because I had to limit the friends I hung out with. I did find a 12-step group, and I discovered there were all sorts of people in recovery, from plumbers to professors. And I discovered that sobriety is a process. It's why we call the 12 steps. One of my favorite writers is Joan Chittister. She's a Roman Catholic writer. And she has this to say about surrender. She says, Surrender is the moment in which we realize that it's time to become someone new. Surrender is not about giving up, it's about moving on. What is it we need to let go of in order to be made? I think it's why Jesus always started with people by simply asking, what do you want? He didn't assume he knew what their problem was. He didn't assume that they deserved, they wanted his help. They just wanted to know, what is it you want? I think that's a question where we need to start. In recovery and out of recovery, what is our deepest desire? And what have you put in your life that keeps you from embracing it? And do you have the courage to walk towards that desire, to walk towards that dream, one day at a time? Often we think too small. We need to think larger, bigger. We need to remember that God is with us, God is behind us, God will guide us, and God has commissioned us to do the work so that we will be about changing the world. So we hunger for a connection to the source of life. We hunger for a sense of God's blessing. But in this consumer culture, we just get confused because the culture tells us you are what you own, you are what you do, you are what people say about you. And when those don't work, somehow we lose our reputation, we lose our job, we lose our possessions. Then we try to paste over that pain with something else, like food, like relationships, like possessions, like alcohol, like drugs. After I saw Kitty Maya, the alcohol specialist, I knew what I wanted, and I also knew the cost of getting there. I knew I had to let go of my addiction to alcohol, and it was hard. But what kept going was my desire for a new life. Plus, I have to say, I had a lot of support from my wife and a lot of support from my friends, particularly those who had done this. I was in this limbo period where I'd applied to be a priest, but I hadn't heard from the bishop. And so I was waiting to see what that was going to be like. I got this letter, the bishop of the Diocese of Tennessee, and I was standing in our front yard when I got the letter out of the mailbox, 2113 19th Avenue South. I was standing in the front yard. I opened the envelope and read the first words. I'm pleased to accept you as a postulant for holy orders. That's Episcopal speak for saying, yes, you can go on to seminary. Yes, you're going to become a priest in the church. This was wonderful news. This was the news I had been waiting for all my life. But my first thought was I really a good enough person to be a priest? I stood in the front yard wondering, what if I started drinking again? What if I were an embarrassment to the church? I hadn't been drinking for 2 weeks, but that's only 2 weeks. Could I keep this up? And that sort of monkey mind started all over again. That sort of, what if this happens? And what if that happens? And are you good enough? Are you worthy enough? I heard a voice speak to me. I mean, I heard a voice in my ears speak to me. I can't explain it. I believe it was the Holy Spirit. It's the only time it's ever happened in my life. And the voice said, remember, you are more than this. Remember, you are more than this. I knew that this was my alcoholism. I knew that this was my old way of dealing with my fears. I knew that I needed to remember I was more than my doubts about my worthiness. I was more than my past struggles. I was more than the years where I felt as if I was lost. To be more than this was be connected to a higher source. And so what mattered was not what I could do, which was this big. What mattered is what God can do and will do and is doing because God is God. I had been in this world of self-achievement for so long, I forgot there was a higher source. I didn't know that the word for being transformed is surrender. Joan Chittister says, surrender is the moment in which we realize it is time to become someone new. Surrender is not about giving up, it's about moving on. And so when I heard more than this, I knew it was bigger than just drinking. It was the way I saw the world. It was this illusion that I was by myself, that I was on my own, that there was no other source of help. I was invited by God to step into a new life. And so my addiction meant all I could think of was drinking. And that's how I defined myself. And that part of me was dying because I was invited into being something bigger. I once had a friend who said, you know, people can't get enough of what they don't need. And so why else would we drink poison and think it would make us feel better? Here's the thing, God's love for us is always stronger than our fear. God's love is stronger than our doubts about our worthiness because each of us is more than this. Each of us is called over and over again to come out of our own room and to delight and flourish in the courts of the world. Those of you who know the AA promises remember this line. We suddenly realize that God is doing for us what we could not do for ourselves. We get sober because we believe in God, not because we believe in us. But let's remember what we're promised. We're going to know a new freedom and a new happiness. We will comprehend the word serenity and know peace. We will suddenly realize that God is doing for us what we could not do for ourselves. Are these extravagant promises? We think not. They're being fulfilled among us, sometimes quickly, sometimes slowly. They will always materialize if we work for them. What God is doing is making us more than this, more than our past, more than our fears. Remember the quote from the book of Acts. When you seek me with all your heart, I will let you find me. Our job is the seeking, seeking for God so that God might do for us what we cannot do for ourselves. Of course, we don't know how to change the world. Of course, we don't know how to bring harmony and civility to our nation's leaders. Of course, we don't know what to do about the violence and racism in our country. Of course, we don't. We're human. But what we do know is that God knows. So sobriety is more than not drinking. Sobriety is a way of seeing. It's a way of being. It's an orientation. Because if I have gotten sober by God's help, then anything is possible. We live in this miracle, and therefore we need to believe that miracles can happen everywhere. The poet Joan Hirschfield writes, "Hope is the hardest love we carry." But, you know, hope is only hard to carry if you've never experienced a miracle. And getting sober is a testimony to what God, your higher power, is doing, has done, and will do. And that's a miracle. And therefore, miracles can happen everywhere. And we're invited to be an agent of that, of God changing the world. Let me just close by reminding us of our larger context. My fear is that we as a country have become addicted to division. We now divide ourselves by who we are not. As many of you know, Bill Wilson wrote about emotional sobriety. And this is what he wrote in part. Quote, "Plainly, I could not avail myself to God's love until I was able to offer it back by loving others as God would have me. And I couldn't possibly do that as long as I was victimized by false dependency." So sobriety is more than not drinking. It's even more than hearing from our higher power, "You are more than this." Because God is calling for us to realize we are all more than this. The truth is, there are so many people that are lost. There are so many people that have forgotten who they are. And so, my brothers and sisters, God is saying to you what God said to me 30 years ago. You are more than this. And our cities, our states, our nation is more than this. We are more than Republicans or Democrats. We are more than conservatives or liberals. Dorothy Day, the great champion for social justice, said, "This is what we're here for, to change the world." And what I say to you is this is what we get sober for, to change the world. We do that by being the small light of sanity in what has become an insane world. We do that by believing that our sobriety is contagious. It will have a ripple effect larger than we can imagine. We do that by praying over and over and over again, "I believe, help my unbelief." We do that by embracing sobriety. Now is the time. Now is the time for us to step out of our rooms. Now is the time for us to give thanks. We give thanks that we have been invited into the courts of the Lord. Because the truth is, this country, this world is more than this. Let me end with some words from Mother Teresa. People are often unreasonable, irrational, and self-centered. forgive them anyway. If you are kind, people may accuse you of selfish, ulterior motives. Be kind anyway. If you are successful, you will win some unfaithful friends and some genuine enemies. Succeed anyway. If you are honest and sincere, people may deceive you. Be honest and sincere anyway. What you spend years creating, others could destroy overnight. Create anyway. If you find serenity and happiness, some may be jealous. Be happy anyway. The good you do today will often be forgotten. Do good anyway. Give the best you have, and it will never be enough. Give your best anyway. In the final analysis, it is between you and God. It was never between you and them anyway. God bless you. It's been an absolute pleasure to be with you, and I wish you all the best and great courage and great peace and all the grace in your process and in your journey towards even more and more sobriety.
Parker, Parker's my grandchild, I'm sorry. Porter, thank you for your powerful personal story. Two questions for you as a pastor now, particularly with the knowledge of where you've been, what you've gone through. What would have happened in your church when you were 14 had there been some program, whatever that might have looked like, that talked to you and your colleagues about the dangers of alcohol, substance use?
You know, that's a great question, Jim. And honestly, it would have been incredibly helpful because I grew up in a culture that thought alcoholism was normative.
Mm-hmm.
I grew up in a culture that thought one of the ways you become adult was by drinking. And I had virtually no examples of any other behavior.
Right.
And so, and for me, you know, part of being part of my family was to join the club of drinking.
So I understand. My parents were World War II folks, probably like yours,
Right.
where alcohol and smoking, everybody did it. You know, I didn't see a lot of people falling down drunk, but that's a progressive disease, and I did see it even in my own family in time. Another question, as a follow-up to the first, what could a church program today in a faith community look like, with perhaps sermons or speeches by the pastor, the leader, Sunday school, counseling programs within the faith community? What do you see as possible resources for the faith community? We see trying to, in the work that we're doing, trying to reach young people through a variety of responsible adults. So it's their parents, it may be their faith leaders, it could be a coach, it could be a teacher, it could be a doctor. But as a faith leader, what do you see that's possible there that would be a good, effective program?
Yeah, I think of two things. So again, sort of in-house with the church, we think of salvation as somehow not doing anything wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And we think of it as what's required is that you have to check off that you believe all these things, you know. And what we forget about it is that, number one, it's a process. So what
Mm.
matters is that we're on a journey. That's why Jesus called it the way. So it doesn't matter where you are, it's where you want to go that matters. And therefore, what we need to do is to have a more holistic view of what this is about. We think it's all up here, but it's actually more about how do you see yourself? How do you define yourself? How do you treat one another? How aware are you about your surroundings? One of the exercises that I did with our teenagers when I was a priest in a church in Athens was we went to all parts of Athens.
Mm-hmm.
So they had never seen the projects. They had never seen the low income side of town. All they thought of was Athens was University of Georgia. So I think that's the first thing. I think the second thing is that church needs to make allies with other agencies that are doing this work. We all get into this sort of silo thing where we think we're worried about getting credit for what we do, so we'll look good, so we'll get more members. And what matters is just the work. If you remember when Jesus sends the disciples out, he says, you can't take anything with you. And he says, you just go to the first person you meet. You can't be selective about it. And I think that's what we need to do. We need to have a more expansive sense where we can partner with all kinds of folks. And we can think of, particularly for young folks, how do they become more aware of their community?
And what about speaking to young folks who may not have heard, may not have understood the progressive nature of the disease or how it affects your success as a student or an athlete, or finding the job that you've got your heart set on? How do we talk to them? I mean, what do we say to them that might make a difference? It might not turn somebody around at 14, but it might be a message that keeps coming back to them in time. And when they're ready, something good might happen. Speak to that if you would.
Well, I think there are a couple of things. One is, I think sharing our story is always helpful.
Mm-hmm.
I think we have to be honest about that. But I think that's what we need to hear is we need to hear, this is where I was and this is what happened to me and this is,
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's the first thing. I think the other thing is we need to help youth find ways of feeling better about themselves that don't involve alcohol or drugs.
Yeah.
What we want to do is we want to feel at home in ourselves and we want to feel as if we're connected. So there are other ways to do that. Honestly, sports was incredibly helpful for me.
Mm-hmm.
It didn't keep me from drinking, but it kept me at least with a sense of self-worth. So I think that's another thing. And I think the other thing is, I think it's important that our young folks have a sense of their future. I think they have a sense that if they want to get to here, these are the steps they need to take in order to get there. So they don't sort of get fixated on the most important thing is to be popular in this moment. Maybe the most important thing is to have some stepping stones to whatever their dream is. Right? Yeah.
Okay. There perhaps will be other questions. I want at this time to introduce Dr. Wanda Boone, who is the founder and director of Coalition in Durham. It's the most remarkable umbrella type program that I've ever seen. She's also a pastor with her husband, and she's also an ambassador for Talk It Out NC.
Right.
So she's a dear friend, And I want her to kind of give a response from her perspective
Great.
of what you've talked about and where we're trying to be in addressing what the faith community can do in this area. Wanda?
Hello, I'm here. It looks like my video is not showing me. I don't think you can see me, but I certainly can see you. I'm trying to see what's happening with the video. And I did check in with Preston yesterday and everything was great. So in the interest of time, I'm not going to try to correct that. So thank you, Jim. Thank you, Preston. Thank you, Porter, for your marvelous and wonderful inspirational talk. One of the things that I will say is that, of course, alcohol doesn't care about ethnicity. I think we can say that, and I'm certainly not going to repeat your wonderful message, and I have no intention of doing that. I will say that when I was 4 years old, I used to not want to play outside because I wanted to read my Jesus book. When I was 6 years old, I sat in my grandmother's rocking chair and just really enjoyed being on her lap and hearing her sing to me. And she was a very relational person with the Lord. I won't say she was religious. She had a wonderful relationship with the Lord. And little did I know that that experience with her would be the beginning of something that I really needed in my life. So I became addicted to alcohol when I was a teenager due to trauma. And it was after she passed away, but before she did pass away, she said, "Wanda, you're going to be someone really special when you grow up." And I did not realize how much I needed to hear that because the trauma was so great. So first of all, I want to say that I do understand teenagers. I do understand the things that teenagers go through. And one of the things that is really important from my perspective is thinking about low wealth, young people who are in low wealth communities that don't have money, don't feel that they have a future, don't have the access that we would want them to have, and what many of us have in terms of our growing up. So that's something that's really, really important. But that doesn't mean that there is no hope. The way that we can become instrumental in helping young people to achieve their greatness with the Lord is by helping to provide those things that they need. So I just want to mention Isaiah 58, verses 6 through 9, reading from the Message translation of the Bible. And there, to me, is a really what I won't call secret message, but certainly is a nugget that is in the very, very, very midst of that scripture. Isaiah 58, 6 through 9 says, now, let me back up by saying that sometimes we want to grovel with the Lord in order to become more whatever it is we think that we need to be, when in fact, he just wants us as we are. Can you believe that? That he thinks that who he created us to be really can be the greatest sense of who we are? I mean, that is spectacular. Anyway, one of the things that we might try to do is to fast our way out of addiction or fast our way out of a situation. But this is what the Bible says about that. This is the kind of fast I'm after. To break the chains of injustice, get rid of exploitation in the workplace, free the oppressed, cancel debts. What I'm interested in seeing you do is sharing your food with the hungry, inviting the homeless poor into your homes, putting clothes on the shivering, ill-clad. Here it is. Get ready for it. Being available to your own families.
Yeah.
Can you believe that in the midst of doing all those things for other people, feeding the poor, making sure that you're doing something for the homeless, putting clothes on the shivering ill-clad, that God says to us, be available to your own families. One of the things that addiction does is to separate us and isolate us from those that we love the most. Why? Because we're scared. But here it is. Here it is that we should be available to our own families. Are families being available to us? No, we are available to our families to bring to them what we know to be true, to bring to them what we know to be beneficial. And this is what happens. Your righteousness, oh, wait, back up. Do this, and the lights will turn on, and your lives will turn around at once. Your righteousness will pave your way. The God of glory will secure your passage. Then, when you pray, God will answer. You'll call out for help, and I'll say, I'm here. But the reason, and one of the reasons, is that we're taking the focus off of ourselves, looking outward to meet the needs of others. So think about it. When we arrive at parenthood with our own experiences, fear, teenage behaviors, perhaps, and we enter into our faith walk with the same baggage, we have to let ourselves be free. Free ourselves by understanding that we can leave the past behind and gift our children, grandchildren, and families with the knowledge that we did not have ourselves. We no longer have to hide from our past. We can break free and say, that was then, this is now. So finally, in our busy, distracted lives, let's not forget to be available to our own families. Let's not be afraid to be, vulnerable enough to open ourselves up to those that we love. Sure, in some families, this is not possible because they have not recovered themselves from the trauma that they're in. But who are you to your family whom you love? You can present yourself to your families in such a loving way that you will be satisfied in what you have done. So again, yes, there is always hope, and the Lord is there to help us with that hope. But not only that, He's walking with us every step of the way. Thank you so much.
Amen.
Wanda, thank you very much. That's why I love you so much.
That's why I love you so much.
Are there, thank you, dear. Are there other questions for Porter or Wanda? Preston, maybe you can look at it because I don't know how to do this. I've reached my limit on technological stuff today.
Jim, I don't see any questions, but if I may ask Dr. Taylor
Yeah.
a question myself, I'd love to do so.
Please do. Yeah.
Awesome. Dr. Taylor, with the current state of the church right now being mostly virtual, people aren't attending church like they normally would. How would you suggest, or what would you recommend parents, guardians, faith leaders, etc.? How would you encourage them to reach the younger youth now in regards to alcohol and fighting the temptation and having that conversation?
Boy, that's a hard one. I think we always have to begin by being honest. So I think we have to name where we are. This is where we are. This is what we've lost. And therefore, how can we find ways to, as the scripture says, put on the armor of Christ? And I think that honestly, what we need to do is to talk to our young folks and ask them, how do you find community? How do you feel supported? how do you feel so that when you get isolated, where are your sources of connection? Because I think, honestly, at my age, I know so little about technology that it's hard for me to make those suggestions. Um, so I guess what I'm saying, Preston, is I think we just have to name this is a condition we live in, and see what ideas they have. The other thing is, I think that one of the few gifts of COVID is that we have so much time. We can also have different conversations with our children. We can be honest about what's going on with us, what are the trials and tribulations of this. But one of the few gifts of COVID is that we're stuck with each other. And therefore, you know, we can find different ways of being connected at a much deeper level. I mean, because the only gift of COVID is we really do have all this time on our hands, and there's so few places we can go. I wish I had better answers.
You're fine. Thank you. Dr. Boone, if you want to take part in that too, I know you're leading a ministry yourself as well. So if you'd like to take part of that, feel free.
Sure, I'd be happy to. So we actually have a youth coalition for young people ages 7 to 17, and then a college age coalition for older adult, young adults who are college age, 18 to 24. And so we started this because we understood that children, especially in teenage years, do not want to listen to what their parents have to say. They don't want to listen to what adults have to say. So why not create a system where peers can talk to peers and give them the proper messaging so that they know the right thing to say. They learn the science, they learn what alcohol really is, they learn the dangers, and then they also understand, well, why do I want this anyway? The big question, well, I won't go into that, that's too long. So my point is that in creating a system where peers talk to peers, it's been very, very successful, even in bringing down the past 30-day use of alcohol among high school students in Durham. So we're really proud of that. And the way that they do that is through social media, making videos. I mean, they find the ways to take the message to their peers. So that's one of the things that works.
Okay,
Thank you.
great. Preston, is there anything else?
No, sir. I'm not seeing
Okay.
anything in the chat.
Okay, well, I want to thank Porter and Wanda for their contributions today. It was wonderful. It was inspiring. I do want to say that there are other faith initiatives, programs, belief systems who in the faith realm, and so we want to try to. We here in our Talk It Out program want to try to reach across all of these programs who express their belief in a higher power. And that's very important to us, and we don't want to leave anybody out, as we're particularly these young people who are very vulnerable. I would like to tell you that next week, we're pleased in the fifth and final talk of our virtual conference. First off, I want to announce that we're going to continue Talk It Out Tuesday, starting again in May for one Tuesday a month for the rest of the year, starting in May. So we're going to take the month of April, which is Alcohol Awareness Month. We've got a huge program platform, as do others, in the prevention, treatment, and recovery support communities Porter talked about silos. We want to get rid of silos, all work together. So we're going to join our friends and supporters and other communities across the state in proclaiming April, is Alcohol Awareness Month, and bringing good programming to that effort. But in May, we will start again on talking out Tuesday, one Tuesday a month, and we'll let everybody know about that. Next week, for our fifth and final talk, would be William Moyers, who's head of community development for Hazelton Betty Ford Foundation. He's an old friend of mine, and we're really pleased that he's going to be with us next week. So look forward to seeing everybody next week. As we close, I'd like to close with this. For all who seek to help youth and families in their struggles with alcohol and substance use and addiction, and especially those that work in communities of faith, here's a poem by Judith Toy. If God is fire and I am burning wood, I ask but that I burn without a trace. Along the way, may I be wood that's good, that I may cast some light upon the face of one whose sufferings are deeper than mine. May it be so for all of us. Go in peace. Have a great day, and we'll see you guys next week. Wanda, thank you again.
My pleasure.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.